Hello there. Here are the 5 things that you need to know as it relates to the Big Me Hibreak. All right, let's get into it. Okay, we'll start with number 1, the basics. What is it? Well, the Big Me Hibreak is an e-ink cellular phone. It's going to be running Android 11 and it's going to have full access to the Google Play Store. Although it should be noted that Google Play apps aren't always optimized for an e-ink screen. Nevertheless, reading apps and things like that should work on it just fine. Now, this isn't the first time we've had an e-ink smartphone. There have been ones in the past, but they haven't always been well situated in the market in terms of having connectivity to Google Play natively, or how the cellular connectivity has worked. So this promises to be something that people have been waiting for a long time. In fact, last year, Books released a device in similar form factor, which was the Palma, which didn't have cellular connectivity, but in other regards was very similar to what the Hibreak is. And essentially, a lot of people really like that device and wish it had cellular connectivity. So there's a lot of interest in this particular device. Now, should you be concerned that this device is running Android 11? Well, not necessarily. Android 11 is actually a very common version of Android that's used by e-ink, although we have seen some recent devices move up to Android 12 and even 13, and I think in one case 14 as well. Nevertheless, apps still continue to run on Android 11, and in particular reading apps or apps like Google News, and Microsoft with Word and Excel, etc. So there's definitely a lot of value still with Android 11, and security updates will be maintained for that until toward the end of 2026. So there's definitely still a lot of life left in Android 11. Let's go on then to the number 2 thing that you should be aware, and that's the price. Now, we see on the screen the price in yen. For some reason, my computer thinks that I'm in Japan. But actually, if we click real quickly, there are 2 versions of the device, a black and white and color. If we click to the color version, we see it's $249 in American dollars, and the black and white, $219. This is a really great price. And if you think about the 7th generation iPod Touch, which was released back, I believe, in 2019, this is within the realm of what that device sold for. In fact, I think it's a little bit less. Now, some people are looking at that and going, well, is this going to be a cheap phone? Should we be concerned by the price? I suppose that's a concern, and we'll have to see how that plays out in the reviews. But just looking at the pricing alone, I think it's an excellent price for the product that you're getting. So I think it's really well positioned in the market, and I'm glad to see the prices at this level. Again, we'll have to see if the quality matches or if you get a lesser experience. But as far as what I can tell in terms of the specs, I don't think that's going to be the case. And that actually takes us to number 3. Okay, so let's talk about the specifications of this phone. As you can see on the screen, it's got 6 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabytes of storage, although there is the ability to expand the storage with a card. Obviously, there's an eSIM card as well. You can see the size of the screen, so it's a fairly modestly sized phone. And then it has the octa-core 2.3 gigahertz CPU. Now, we actually know exactly what CPU this particular device has, and it actually is a MediaTek chip that came out in 2018. Now, that may sound like a bad thing, but it may not be as bad as you think. True, when we see new phones come out all the time, we're looking for it to have the latest and greatest processor, but a large degree of why that's important is because of the screen. E-ink screens don't require as much processing power as we might be used to in phones. And in fact, I'm going to cut away and show another device that's using what I think is the exact same chip as this device, and you can get a sense of its performance in that cutaway. So let's take a look at that now. So I wanted to take a quick moment to kind of show, this is the Big Me InkNote Color Plus. And obviously, there's a number of key differences between this device and the Hibreak, whether it's the color or the black and white one. It's probably using a different screen. It seems like the color version of the Hibreak might be Kaleido Plus. I don't know that for sure, but based on the specifications, particularly the fact that the color density is a third of the black and white density, that does imply Kaleido Plus. This screen is Kaleido 3. So it has a higher pixel density with the color at 150 ppi versus I think it's 92 with the Hibreak. And of course, this is a 10-inch screen. The Hibreak comes with, just under a 5.8-inch screen. I should say just above 5.8 inches. And so two very different devices. So why am I showing this device? I believe this device is using the exact same processor and same amount of RAM that we'll experience with the Hibreak. So I thought it might be interesting to take a quick look at its performance. And I'm just going to go ahead and launch Google News, and then we'll do some scrolling and get a sense of how the device performs. So let's go ahead and just do that. Okay, we just logged in. I'd already logged in to Google News, so actually let me go ahead and back out of that. Here we go. We'll go ahead and clear out the RAM and start over. So we'll see how long it takes to launch from a starting position. So pretty quickly. And then let's go ahead and just do some scrolling. So a little choppy, but definitely, look at that. Definitely responsive. In fact, why don't we go ahead and go into this article. There we go. It loads pretty quick. So it's not instantaneous, but it's pretty responsive. So even though the chip itself is an older chip, and this is going back to 2018, with e-ink, it still works fairly well. So it's hard to say. This demonstration does not necessarily tell us how it's going to work on the Hibreak phone. It could be that the Hibreak is a little snappier because it's moving a smaller screen. It could be, totally different for ways we don't know. But I am optimistic based on the performance on this device that the processor will go fairly well with the Hibreak phone. But of course, that's something that we'll review when the device is released. Okay, to kind of finish the discussion around the specifications, there is some question about the cellular connectivity of the device. And you can see on the screen all the bands that are supported by the phone. So I'll just use kind of an anecdote. I've been thinking about potentially using Mint Mobile as a way of adding cellular connectivity to the device when I receive it. And so that's using the T-Mobile network. And so doing some research on the T-Mobile network, the primary band, which I believe is band 4, is what T-Mobile uses for its 4G LTE network. It's not on this phone, but what is on this phone are the bands that were formerly used by Sprint. So in theory, I should be able to use the T-Mobile network via Mint Mobile because it has those bands. I only mention all this as an anecdote that there is some ambiguity about how good the cellular connectivity is going to be with the device. And at least based on what I can tell, and I'm not an expert in this area, I'm just going to need to get the device and find out, how well it connects. And your situation may vary. But just know that even though some of the bands on the phone are represented in the North American market, it may not always be the best bands that that particular carrier offers. And so you just need to do some research just to see if it's valid in your area. And of course, the review should help too in seeing how well this phone actually does connect to networks. So that actually takes us to number 4, which is that this is actually the first of 2 waves in what's being called the Hibreak line. And this first wave, which we've just talked about, those are all the specs that we've covered. The second wave will differ in a few notable respects. The first thing is it'll have a more updated processor. It'll have a Dimensity 900, which is a few years younger than the one in the Hibreak that we've discussed so far. It'll also have 8 gigabytes of RAM as opposed to 6, and it'll double the storage. It'll also have Android 14, so it'll have a lot more specifications, or beefier specifications, I should say, than what we've covered so far. And the way I'm kind of thinking about it is this first wave feels like it's the e-ink equivalent of the iPod Touch that, it'll have, but with cellular connectivity, right? So it'll have all those functions through the Google Play Store, with a little bit of cellular connectivity so that you can walk around without necessarily having to take another phone to have connectivity on that device. So I'm excited in this first round from that type of mindset. If you're looking more for the cellular phone component, it's probably the second wave that's going to be more relevant to you because, again, it'll have the more updated Android operating system and it'll have other specs. We don't know if the screens will be any different, but certainly it just seems like the second wave is better for phones and the first wave is better for using it as a device like the iPod Touch. Okay, that takes us to the fifth thing, which are my final thoughts about all of this. Actually, just before I get into my final thoughts, there is one particular point I've neglected to mention, and that's around the pixel density of the screen. The black and white screen has a 275 PPI, and that's actually pretty good. The highest level of PPI we've seen in an e-ink device is 300, so it's pretty close to that, and I actually think that will be fine. The color might be a little bit different. The color is currently running around 92 PPI, and that's fairly low. That also kind of hints that the screen is using the Kaleido Plus technology, which is a color screen that's a generation behind. Kaleido 3 is the current generation of color, and it has a color density about half of that of black and white, whereas here it's a third. So that's why it suggests that it's Kaleido Plus, although that's not officially been stated. So that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about the color version. There might be a little bit more graininess than you might expect otherwise. Okay, putting that aside, what are my thoughts? Well, I've already kind of telegraphed it a little bit. I actually have a lot of optimism about this device, particularly this first wave, as it relates to kind of an iPod Touch with cellular connectivity alternative. I can imagine walking around the neighborhood, maybe listening to music with my Bluetooth headphones. It does not have a headphone jack, I should point out, which is a big deal to some, but not for me because I use my Bluetooth earbuds. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm looking forward just to having a sense of how well it's as a reader, whether it be for books or for an app like Flipboard or Google News and that sort of thing. I'm just really interested in this device. Now, I've reviewed Bigme devices for a while now, a little over a year. The original device that I demonstrated earlier in the video that I purchased was the InkNote Color Plus. And I've really liked that device. Now, have I recommended it over similar books devices? Not necessarily. I think it has certain aspects that I think are better than books, but books has generally provided a better overall package, and particularly true with the Note Air 3C. But here's the interesting thing about that. The biggest weakness the Bigme has against a device like the Note Air 3C is the note-taking app. The Books device has a much more sophisticated and refined note-taking device than the Bigme, which has a good note-taking device, but it just doesn't have the features that Books has. Well, the reason why I'm mentioning that is the primary differentiator. And now that we're getting to a smaller form factor, and we're not talking about note-taking in this case because there's no Wacom ability, then that is not a differentiator anymore. And Bigme does do a good job with their hardware, even though there are older internals. They've been very reliable in my experience. In addition to that, the UI and the way they run Google has been pretty flawless to me. I've really had no issues in terms of running Google Play apps, although I'm mainly just running, as I noted, reading apps, Google News, and Microsoft apps. But those have all worked fine. I've had any crashing issues. So I actually think this device is really poised to really play on Bigme's strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. And I think there's a lot of potential here. We'll have to see. I mean, I think the rubber's going to hit the road. Testing is going to be required to see, can it deliver on these promises. I'm just saying that my historical experience with Bigme gives me reason for optimism. So I think that this is pretty interesting. And at the price point that it's at, it's definitely worth checking out, which I will be doing. Bigme has reached out to me and will be sending me a review model. I'm not sure if it'll be the black and white or the color one, and I'm not particularly concerned. I'm kind of leaning toward hoping to review the black and white one, actually. But regardless, I'll get a chance to test the things like how does the cellular connectivity work, and again, I'll be trying the Mint mobile network, or how responsive is it in scrolling. I will test how it works as a phone, even though I think it's going to probably be more like an iPod Touch with cellular connectivity, as I've noted before. So I'll definitely try to check all of those aspects. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about this, and I'm pretty excited. Big Me has been a company that, in my experience, really tries to experiment, and sometimes does great with those experiments, and sometimes doesn't do great with those experiments. But I really appreciate that they're out there doing interesting things, and as I said, sometimes they hit it. So I'm hoping this might be one of those too. But we'll see. Even though I'm receiving a copy, I'm going to give it a fair review, and you'll see, as with all my other reviews, firsthand how the device performs, as I tend to focus on my devices when I do my reviews. So something to look forward to. Anyway, I hope this frames everything for you. You have a sense of what's coming and what the big picture is. The devices will release probably toward the end of this month, that is June of 2024. So it won't be very long, and we'll get a sense of whether Big Me's delivered, and if so, how well they've delivered. So hopefully, I'm looking forward to reviewing it. Please subscribe, because I'm sure I'll do a number of reviews on this device as I'm going through and working with it, and I'll be sharing those with you. So I look forward to seeing you there, and until then, have a great day.